Thank you to my patrons. Your generosity and commitment to my work is astonishing. I sincerely appreciate it.
What kind of an asshole would you have to be to strip away somebody's belief in God? Especially, if they're not that sophisticated, not so intelligent as you, perhaps.
I'll tell you the kind of asshole I am, and here's where we get into the real nitty-gritty of this video. I'll tell you what kind of asshole one has to be in order to strip away somebody's belief in God. You need to be the kind of asshole that recognizes that somebody's religion can actually harm them. Even though they might not be aware of it, their religion can, foist upon them certain opportunity costs.
If you ever try to bullshit me like that again, I will rip off your arms.
Hey everybody, Magic Skeptic here, and don't worry, the video is about to begin. I just wanted to take a moment to make you aware of my Patreon, the link for which can be found in the description below. Sign up today for as little as £3 per month and you can gain access to a plethora of perks and extras, including downloadable audio-only and ad-free versions of my podcast that you can listen to on the go. You can also have your question answered in a monthly video, and better still, depending on which tier you choose, you could even sit down for a Skype call with yours truly, Magic Skeptic. All that is available and much, much more. All you got to do is click the link in the description below. I hope to see you there. Hey everybody, and welcome to the premiere episode of the most annoying non-religious people. So this has been a long time coming, folks. I announced this in the comments and I spoke about it during my Q&A, and a lot of people seem to be interested in me exploring the opposite side of the aisle, exploring atheists and some of their bad arguments, or non-religious people at the very least, and their bad arguments. And on that note, folks, the reason this series is going to be called the most annoying non-religious people, as opposed to just the most annoying atheists, is that not all religious, or rather not all non-religious people identify as atheists. Some of them identify as agnostic, for example, and some of them even identify as spiritual and so forth. So I just wanted to have an umbrella term that kind of captures everything in one phrase. And so here we are, your premiere episode of the most annoying non-religious people. And boy, do I have a good episode for you today. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the CRP archive, otherwise known as the Coach Red Pill archive. Coach Red Pill is an incredibly controversial figure, and if you haven't heard of him, let's just say that by the end of this episode, it'll become pretty clear to you why this guy is perhaps not only famous, but infamous. And speaking of which, we're going to dive right in here. He produced a video called Atheists Are Stupid. And not surprisingly, I, the Magic Skeptic, have a few thoughts on the matter. So welcome to this premiere episode of the most annoying non-religious people. Let's dive right into Coach Red Pill's thoughts. Himself an atheist, but let's dive into his thoughts on why atheists are stupid. Have a listen.
Christmas is fast approaching, and I had a little incident a couple of days ago that was, quite frankly, it sort of rattled me. You see, my daughter is 4 years old, and I noticed that she was looking despondent.
Good word.
So I went up to her and I asked her, what's wrong? What's the matter? And she looked at me with these big, beautiful eyes of hers. And she said that she had been over playing at her little friend's house, and the little friend's older brother, a 10-year-old boy, had intimated that Santa Claus didn't exist. I mean, oh boy, right?
To be fair to Coach Red Pill here, I entirely empathize with his situation. This is a shit thing to happen. 4 years of age, I mean, come on, to have your child's dreams of Santa Claus, to have that bubble be burst at that age, that sucks. And it puts you as a parent in a very, very difficult position. And if you want to know what I would do in that situation, dear listener, I would absolutely reinforce the child's belief in Santa Claus. And as you're about to hear, Coach Red Pill does the exact same thing. And yet, there's absolutely no contradiction in reinforcing that Santa Claus belief and not reinforcing the God belief. I'll explain why in a moment. But first of all, let's hear the next part of the story.
Santa Claus was a big deal to her, right? And here was this 10-year-old little punk telling her that Santa Claus didn't exist. And she was looking at me for answers, right? So I knelt down to be at eye level with her, and I leaned forward and looked her in the eye with a furrowed brow. And I held her gaze, and I said to her, "Of course he exists. I talk to him all the time. Yeah, I do. I talked to him a couple of days ago. I have his number on speed dial." Wait, let's see if... Oh, wait. It's kind of late in the North Pole. You know, Santa is probably sleeping. Santa and Mrs. Claus and the little elves, they're all probably sleeping right now, so I'm not going to call him now. But, I'll call him tomorrow, and if I don't catch him, look, Christmas Eve, when Santa comes over, we'll stay up and we'll talk to him, right? Yeah, of course he exists. Santa Claus. Yes, of course, dear, he exists. Absolutely. I'm telling you that he exists. Okay? The weight, I could see the weight coming off her shoulders, you know?
Kudos to you, Coach Red Pill. Again, like I've already said, I would have done exactly the same thing in this situation. I think the innocence and the fantasies of children should be preserved. Obviously, there does come a point where one must put childish things away. But again, we'll come to that a little bit later on, because you can probably already see where he's going with this analogy, dear listener. And you're going to see the beginning stages of why I featured Coach Red Pill in this first episode of The Most Annoying Non-Religious People. So buckle up. If you're easily frustrated, you're going to need to take, speaking of pills, you're going to need to take a chill pill in order to hear what he says next. Okay? All right? You've been warned. Let's do it.
And she ran off to play, and that was that. Emergency solved. Some of you, I'm sure, are saying, well, you should have told her the truth, that Santa Claus does exist. And to you, I answer, what kind of a complete asshole would I be to strip away the illusions of a 4-year-old girl?
Agreed. Absolutely, fundamentally agreed. And again, dear listener, you're probably scratching your head wondering why I featured Coach Red Pill in this episode, given the fact that we are essentially in violent agreement up to this point. I think you would be an unbelievable asshole to strip away the fantasies and the make-believe of a 4-year-old child. If your 4-year-old comes to you and says that somebody else in school told them that Santa isn't real, you reassure them that Santa Claus is real. That's what you do. That's the right thing to do. We're firmly agreed. Let's continue.
Her belief in Santa Claus, on the one hand, is perfectly harmless. She's not doing anything because of her belief in Santa Claus. And on the other hand, it actually does some good, because every year she looks forward to Christmas. Every year she's conscientious of staying on Santa's, nice list and not on the naughty list, right? It does a lot of good.
In other words, this belief has social utility. It has no negative consequences.
Her belief in Santa Claus, on the one hand, is perfectly harmless.
All it has is positive utility, which is to say it makes her behave because she wants to be on the nice list, and it makes her happy.
It actually does some good, because every year she looks forward to Christmas. Every year she's conscientious of staying on Santa's, nice list and not on the naughty list, right?
Again, this is all just positive utility. Albeit, I will say one thing, and I think he's almost shot himself in the foot in this story. There is a downside to holding this belief. It's that when others inform you that it's fake or false, you experience the existential dread, for lack of a better phrase, of that belief crumbling, of that belief collapsing, of the whole artifice tumbling down. Your daughter came home traumatized and upset precisely because she believes something that is false.
And I noticed that she was looking despondent.
Now remember, I'm in agreement with you here, Coach Red Pill, that you did the right thing when you reinforced that belief for your 4-year-old child. If my child, if I had one, were 4 years of age and they came home with the same concern, I would do exactly what you did in this situation. But we cannot just pretend here, and I have to correct you, we cannot pretend that having a belief in Santa Claus has no negative attached. I know what you mean here. Extending an olive branch, generally speaking, a belief in Santa Claus only has upsides. The child is going to be more likely to behave, to end up in the nice list. It fills them with the wonder and the imagination and the fantasy and the joy of Christmas and Father Christmas and the reindeer and the elves and all that good stuff. I myself have very fond memories growing up. My parents always did an excellent job of, reinforcing the Santa Claus mythology, and Christmas was just such a genuinely magical time of year, and I adored it, and I wouldn't change it for the world. So again, we're in violent agreement about the course of action that you took here, but we cannot pretend that there's no negative side to the Father Christmas mythology. The negative side is demonstrated by your very own story. That day, the dreaded day that all parents fear, when their child comes home from school with the knowledge that Father Christmas or Santa Claus or Kris Kringle or whatever you want to call him is not real. And the trauma that can, not always, but can be associated with learning that truth. So with that little caveat acknowledged, that it's not just all rosy in the garden when it comes to the Santa Claus mythology. Again, broadly, we're in agreement here. But let's continue and see where he's going with this analogy. Again, I assume, dear listener, that you've already figured that out. But just wait for it. Just wait for it. This is absolutely unbelievable. Let's continue.
Now, Santa Claus and God, I mean, they're two big white guys with big white beards up in the sky, both of them. I mean, they're practically twins. What kind of an asshole would you have to be to strip away somebody's belief in God? Especially, if they're not that sophisticated, not so intelligent as you, perhaps.
I'll tell you the kind of asshole I am, and here's where we get into the real nitty-gritty of this video. I'll tell you what kind of asshole one has to be in order to strip away somebody's belief in God. You need to be the kind of asshole that recognizes that somebody's religion can actually harm them. Even though they might not be aware of it, their religion can, foist upon them certain opportunity costs. Assuming that there isn't any good evidence, and presumably you agree with me, Coach Red Pill, given the fact that you're an atheist, but assuming for a moment that there isn't any good evidence for the God that they believe in, isn't their religion just time wasted? If somebody sincerely believes that they're getting an eternity after they die, isn't it possible that they're going to squander the one and only life that you and I both know that they're getting? If there's no respawns, if there's no reincarnation, if there's no heaven after we die, then isn't every single moment spent in a church pew, isn't every single moment spent praying, isn't every single moment spent on your religion a colossal waste of the one and only truly valuable thing that one has, if atheists are correct, and that is time. This is a non-trivial point, folks. So no, I don't agree with your characterization, Coach Red Pill. I don't agree that I'm an asshole for daring to try and enlighten someone about the nature of reality, for daring to encourage them to live as though their time is urgent, as though their time is finite. The knowledge that one's time is finite, as far as I can tell, increases one's urgency in terms of how they spend it. I mean, just entertain a thought experiment here for a moment, dear listener. If you found out that you had 2 days left to live, would you squander the next 2 days, given the knowledge of your abbreviated existence? Would the finitude of the time that you have remaining, would that encourage you to spend your next 2 days well, or would you be tempted to waste them and just lay around in bed? I'm convinced here, and if you disagree, I would be shocked, dear listener, but I'm rather convinced that the vast majority of people, assuming they're mentally well, I'm convinced that the vast majority, 99.9% of people, would spend those final 2 days, making up for lost time. They would maximize the usage of their time. They would behave as though their time was important and that it was urgent because they've only got 2 days remaining. In other words, finitude creates urgency, finitude creates value, and finitude creates meaning, right? Now ask yourself, dear listener, are we not in exactly that position that we've only got 2 days left to live? It's just that maybe that 2 days is 80 years. Maybe that 2 days is 70 years. Or hell, maybe that 2 days isn't even 2 days. Maybe you're going to walk out in front of a bus tomorrow. Assuming that there's no heaven, assuming that there's no respawns, no restarts, none of that good stuff. Assuming that death is the end and you will, retreat from whence you came, and that is nothingness. Isn't our time infinitely more valuable given those naturalistic assumptions? That is how I think about changing a theist's mind. That is how I think about it, folks. Changing somebody's mind, helping them to lose their belief in God, and helping them to realize the world for what it is, helping them realize the truth of the finitude of life, is a gift. It is not a curse. And so, no, I don't agree with your characterization, Coach Red Pill. I don't think that I'm an asshole for enlightening somebody about the truth. And your analogy with Santa Claus is utterly, utterly facile. Because first of all, elephant in the room, we do expect children to ultimately grow up and lose their belief. Would you have the same reaction, Coach Red Pill, if you met me, a 31-year-old man, and I still believed in Santa Claus? Would you kneel down in front of me and give me that gaze of yours and reassure me that you know Santa Claus and you've got him on speed dial? Would you reassure me and tell me that Santa Claus is really real? Or would you tell me to grow the fuck up? Because I'm not living in the real world and I'm deluded. Right? To pretend that this wouldn't have opportunity costs. How devastating is it going to be for a 31-year-old man such as myself to go to bed on Christmas Eve with the full and sincere belief that Santa Claus is real, having been reassured by you, no less, that he's going to deliver those presents on Christmas Eve? How devastated am I going to be when I wake up on Christmas morning and discover an empty living room without a single present in sight because of my erroneous belief? To pretend that this would have no opportunity cost, to pretend that this has no negative utility, is a joke. It works for children because obviously parents purchase those presents for their children and they continue with the charade. They sneak the presents down from the attic and they set them up in the living room and convince their children that they've had a visitation from a wholesome, bearded, red-suited man called Santa Claus. But if somebody continued believing that, the negative utility is obscene. Negative utility that you experienced with your very own daughter, so not even children fully escape the negative consequences of holding this erroneous belief. And those negative consequences are tenfold when it comes to a belief in God. I've already shared this story, but a good friend of mine was killed in an automobile accident, and when one of his parents arrived to the accident scene to discover that their son was dead, they said, and I quote, "I don't know why God put me on this earth at all." In other words, Coach Red Pill, their belief in the divine, their belief in God had negative utility in this moment. It added to their grief because they were left wondering, why God, why? Why did God allow this? They thought God was supposed to be loving. They thought God was all powerful. They thought God was going to take care of their family and their son. But instead, their son dies tragically in an automobile accident. And they are left picking up the pieces, wondering why the God that they believe in didn't save their child. To pretend that these beliefs don't have negative consequences and to pretend that they don't have negative utility. And I haven't even gotten to the bigger cases like religious terrorism, or the immiseration of homosexuals and women and children, the indoctrination of children, the prevention of the usage of contraception in the continent or on the continent of Africa. To pretend that these beliefs don't have negative utility is insane. I dare say, Coach Red Pill, that you are blind, good sir. You are blind. So even if I agreed with you that the Santa Claus mythology has no negative utility associated with it, and as I've already demonstrated, it does, but even if I agreed that it has no negative utility, the analogy fails to apply to religiosity, because boy, does religiosity have negative utility associated with it. So, I'll leave you make up your own mind, dear listener, but let's listen to what he has to say next.
But I don't believe in God, and yet I would never strip that belief away from anybody, even if my religious upbringing had been damaging to me. It wasn't, by the way. I had a lackadaisical kind of Roman Catholic upbringing, and my family was not particularly religious. I was never religious myself, and I just, the idea of God was never like a big deal. And so today, as a grown man of 50, or nearly 50, I just don't believe in God, and that's that, right?
Just to be clear, I would never so-called strip it away from anyone either. Just a very important point here, guys. Atheists are not the people that go around knocking on people's doors trying to convert them to atheism or trying to deconvert them out of their faith. Atheists don't visit hospitals and visit terminally ill patients and encourage them to lose their faith in their final moments. Atheists are not evangelical in the same way that religious people are. And to the extent that you might be able to find an exception to the rule, it would just be an exception. Atheists don't behave how religious people behave. So no, I don't go around stripping people of their religious beliefs. What I do, and what I've been doing on this channel for quite some time now, is put out content and I have conversations with people. And anybody who's not comfortable having a conversation, I don't speak with them. I only have voluntary consensual discussions with people. Again, atheists don't kick down church doors and shout out from the top of their lungs that there is no God. We don't visit terminally ill patients in hospitals and tell them that there is no God in their final moments. We don't do that. And again, if you could find an example of that, it would very much be the exception. Can you say that about the religious? No. It is very much the norm that evangelical religious types spread their faith. They go out there, they knock on doors, they go into the hospitals and so forth. And even when it comes to their charity work, sometimes they hold that sandwich that the hungry person needs behind a prayer wall, where they have to listen to a sermon before they receive the food and so on. And so guys, no, atheists don't behave how religious people behave. We engage in conversation and we try to change people's minds, but we do so politely, we do so casually, we do so in a consensual manner. And yeah, there are so-called militant, a phrase that never really seemed to fit to me. It seems to imply violence, but there are more hostile atheists out there, the late and great Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins and so forth, right? They're more hostile, but even those, despite their reputation for hostility, they're still having consensual conversations with people. Sure, they might put on a live talk, but you don't have to go, you don't have to attend, and nobody has to watch my YouTube channel. You can click off of this video right now if you're not happy about what I'm saying. I'm not going to jam my opinion down anybody's throat. So no, I don't strip away people's beliefs. I have conversations with people if they're willing to have them. So I really do resent this kind of description of atheists as people who just want to go around and burst people's bubbles. If there are ignorant, unpleasant atheists out there who are behaving that way, as far as I can tell, they very much are the exception, not the rule. And I defy you, dear listener, I defy Coach Red Pill to put a strong case in the opposite direction. Show me the roving bands of atheist evangelical types who are knocking on people's doors. Show me the atheists that go into hospital wards and try to deconvert people on their deathbeds. You won't find them. And if you do, you won't find very many of them, right? I mean, that's got to be an incredibly minority phenomenon if it exists at all. So perhaps I'm, reading too much into the phrase he used here, but when he says that he wouldn't be willing to strip religious people's beliefs away.
But I don't believe in God, and yet I would never strip that belief away from anybody.
I think that description, I think that phraseology makes it sound rather insidious, and I don't know any atheists who are behaving in such an insidious manner. All I see on the online space and all I've encountered in the atheist community for as long as I've been part of it is lovely, polite, decent people who are just interested in having philosophical dialogues and having conversations where they try to learn and where they try to educate and where they try to, above all else, change people's minds if they're willing to have that dialogue. So anyway, let's move on.
But you see, I would never strip away that comfort from somebody else. I've met a lot of people who are religious, some of them deeply religious. And their religion and their belief in God gives them a sense of purpose, especially if perhaps their lives are not as happy as they wish they had been, especially if perhaps their life is filled with defeat and setbacks. What good would it be for me to strip away their belief? What kind of an asshole would I be?
And that's fine. If there are people out there where their religion is absolutely integral to their sense of contentment and happiness, that's cool. I don't want to have conversations with those people either, unless they volunteer for it. Again, I'm not recommending that we kick down the door of a sincere believer who derives much happiness and meaning and profundity from their faith. I'm not recommending that we kick down that person's door and try to drag them out of the house and convert them to atheism while they kick and scream. I'm not recommending that kind of behavior at all. And again, I don't know of any atheist who would recommend that kind of behavior. If somebody is genuinely happy with their faith, good for them. They're welcome to believe it. Off you go. Have at it. I don't care. That's not what we're doing here. But please notice the assumption in the claim that's being made here. He is saying that, you know, religious people are comforted by their religious beliefs, and so it's awful in some sense to strip that away from them.
I would never strip away that comfort from somebody else.
But he's just generalizing here. Not all religious people experience merely comfort. A lot of them experience incredible existential anxiety as a consequence of their faith. The fear of going to hell, for example, which has resulted in the creation of a whole new sphere of psychological counseling and psychiatry in what has become known as fear of hell syndrome, right? This is a very real phenomenon, folks. The people who live in continuous existential dread and basically a form of PTSD as a consequence of their fear of burning in hell for eternity. Not to mention the sexual repression and the guilt that homosexuals feel, for example, or any sexual person feels, for example, if they have, you know, impure thoughts about the neighbor's wife. As it says in the Bible, if you only look at a woman with lust in your heart, you've committed adultery. These are impossible standards, and they create guilt, which has negative utility. They create misery and anxiety and existential angst, all surrounding the question of judgment and whether or not you're going to get in through the pearly gates or whether or not you're going to be banished to an eternal hell. Right? To pretend that this is all just hunky-dory and all religion does is offer comfort is a joke. There are millions of people around the world who, knowingly or not, conscious or unconscious, are suffering at the hands of their religion. I've already mentioned the continent of Africa. Sure, the people who are living in the most Christian parts of Africa might tell you that their faith gives them meaning, and they might think that it's a net positive in their life, but the fact that they're unwilling to use contraceptives because of what the Christian missionaries preach results in more HIV spread. It results in a higher birth rate, which places that are suffering from extreme poverty could well do without. The negative utility is there, whether the believer is aware of it or not. Sure, if you just ask them, they might self-report as being happy and being contented and experiencing meaning as a consequence of their faith, but it's entirely possible that the person you've asked does not know any better, right? Again, at no point am I comfortable here with the assumption that religion merely confers upon people a sense of comfort. Now, am I saying that it can't do that and that that's impossible? No, I'm not. I'm just pointing out that the picture is more complex than the mere assertion that religion confers comfort. There's a hell of a lot more going on here, folks. There's a lot of religious people who suffer at the hands of their faith. To pretend that there's no negative utility here is obscene. To pretend that religion merely causes comfort is a joke. So guys, yeah, I hope I've made this clear, but yeah, let's move on.
How lacking in compassion would I be to go up to somebody who is a believer and rub their nose in their ignorance and say, look how stupid you are. What a moron, what an idiot you are to believe in God and this big white guy up in the sky. How stupid of you.
I agree. That would be an incredibly asshole thing to do, to approach somebody and to call them a moron and to call them stupid. Are you getting the hint here, Coach Red Pill? What is it you're doing right now in this video? How is it that you're addressing the atheist community? Calling them idiots, calling them stupid, calling them moronic, to one extent or another, calling them callous. It's really quite ironic that you want to, lecture atheists and tell them that they'd be assholes if they approached somebody and said that they were assholes. Meanwhile, you're calling atheists assholes. The hypocrisy here is not lost on me. But I agree. An atheist would be an asshole if they approached a person and spoke to them that way. And let me be the first to say, dear listener, if you're an atheist and you have conversations with the religious, don't you dare approach them that way. You shouldn't do that. That's insensitive, that's rude, and it does make you an asshole. Fine. But the key thing that Coach Red Pill is missing here is, again, he has this assumption that the person you're approaching is merely comforted by their religion. Here's the really callous thing, Coach Red Pill. What happens if that Christian is a homosexual who goes to bed every night and wakes up screaming, dreaming of the embers of hell and how their flesh is going to burn, heal, and be burned again for eternity, simply for their nature? Would it be callous to refrain from changing their mind? Or would it be a liberation for that person to have their mind changed and lose their faith? Because I know which one I think it is, dear listener. I know which option I'd prefer there. And needless to say, there are countless other Christians, Muslims, and religious people more broadly who would feel a similar feeling of liberation, because it might be that very same faith that's causing them to suffer in the first place.
What kind of an asshole would I be if I acted that way? And to what purpose? What would be the point of me acting this way towards somebody who holds a belief that is, for the most part, at least Christians and Jews, harmless? The belief in God, it doesn't harm anybody, and it gives a little bit of comfort to people whose lives are not so fortunate as my own.
Did you hear what he just said? At least for Christianity and Judaism, it's harmless. Are you kidding me?
It doesn't harm anybody.
He's clearly never heard of Africa. He's clearly never heard of the Christian right. Are you kidding me? He's clearly never heard of the homosexuals, the LGBTQ plus people, the women and the children who suffer at the hands of the church. Are you joking me? I think here he's showing his hand, folks. Coach Red Pill doesn't have a fucking clue what he's talking about when it comes to religion and the costs that it foists upon society. Yeah, sure, it can have some positive outcomes. Charity, lovely, right? Great. Sense of community, fantastic, great. Lovely buildings, art, yeah, great. All wonderful stuff. I wouldn't deny it for a second. But he has made a very specific claim here. He says there's no negative side effects. None. Zero. That was his claim. None.
It doesn't harm anybody, and it gives a little bit of comfort.
Well, Coach Red Pill has clearly been living under a rock for quite some time.
I've never understood atheists because so many of the problems of their lives could be solved by religion.
You heard it here first, atheists. The cure for all that ails you, religion.
I mean, I know so many atheists, young men who are self-consciously atheist, right? And they're very lonely. And they live alone, and they have no friends, and they are online all the time because that's the only social release that they can find. If they went to church, well, they'd meet very nice people, church-going folk. And, in church mixers, they'd meet some nice girl. Maybe not a supermodel and maybe not very sophisticated, but a decent person.
Or, you could just go to the pub or, go to a chess club or, play some football, play some sports. Or, you could even go to a secular atheist or humanist club and still meet people and have a social calendar. Why would the church be necessary here? And you hear the condescending tone? He speaks about religious people, despite the fact that he's trying to defend them here and their beliefs. You tell me, dear listener, who speaks more respectfully about theists? Coach Red Pill or me? Did you hear what he just said? You could go to church and maybe you might meet a nice girl. Yeah, sure, she won't be the most sophisticated.
They'd meet some nice girl. Maybe not a supermodel and maybe not very sophisticated, but a decent person.
Are you kidding me? What a despicable, condescending way to speak about a group of people. You see, guys, this is the difference between his video and my video, and I would hope, dear listener, that you would agree with me on this. His ego is front and center here. His entire video translates to, well, I don't need God, but these other simpletons do, and I'm going to defend them. I'm going to defend these simpletons from you angry, callous atheists, because even though you're simpletons, I like your belief and it's comforting and I'm happy for you to have it, so you can just have your little simple belief, because you're not very sophisticated and you might need it. That is his tone here, calling them unsophisticated. How insulting is that? I wouldn't dream of referring to church communities that way. And by the way, he's wrong. Sure, there can be unsophisticated people at church, but there can be unsophisticated people in the atheist community as well. There's unsophisticated people in every room and in every club on the planet. But these clubs and these groups and these societies and communities also have intelligent people. Right? Look at Francis Collins, an evangelical Christian whose claim to fame is that he is head of the project that successfully mapped the human genome, one of the most incredible advancements in science in our time. But he's an evangelical Christian. Religious people can be intelligent too. So you can be religious and be smart, you can be religious and be dumb, you can be an atheist and be smart and be an atheist and be dumb. But here he is kind of just hand-waving away church communities as though they're just a collective of unsophisticated people. I think this is incredibly insensitive. I think this is incredibly insulting. And he has the gall to accuse atheists of being callous. He has the gall to accuse atheists of being assholes and being stupid. Take a look in the fucking mirror, Coach Red Pill. My God.
I myself am not religious. I don't believe in God. But I am extremely sympathetic towards those who are religious, who do believe in God. Because what they do, their belief, their religion, gives comfort. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with a little comfort? A little lie, perhaps, an untruth, that fills their life with joy and meaning and purpose. Even very humble lives with very little to look forward to. What's wrong with that?
Hell. Look, I won't spend long on this point because I'd just be repeating myself. Suffice to say, I've already listed a lot of the opportunity costs that one's faith can foist upon them. But I'll just enter one other example here. A lot of the people who just derive comfort, a lot of the people who derive mere comfort from their faith are now cheering and celebrating at the reversal of the decision of Roe v. Wade in the United States. I mean, I'm sorry, dear listener, but it has to be said, the dividing line on that issue is almost certainly, in part at least, religious, where a lot of religious folk, particularly the more evangelical and fundamentalist ones, are absolutely delighted. They're celebrating in joy and jubilation about the reversal of Roe v. Wade. And obviously, speaking as a pro-choice person myself, I'm absolutely horrified by this. I'm horrified for the people who have now lost access to abortion rights in the United States. And this happened because of a so-called private, comforting belief. You see, guys, this is the thing, and it's another thing that he's not acknowledging in this video, is that private comforting beliefs are actually not private because beliefs don't live in a vacuum. Your so-called private and comforting belief is going to have an influence on your behaviour and your beliefs. And as a consequence of the fact that you can vote, your private comforting beliefs can and will affect the lives of others. This is why it's important to change minds, folks. It's not all about just preserving comfort. It's not all just about allowing people to believe what they want to believe. Some beliefs are dangerous, and some beliefs can result in people's rights being, as you put it, stripped away. Coach Red Pill. and abortion rights were just stripped away, or at the very least, they were kicked back to the states, which, because of trigger laws, has resulted in several states immediately banning abortion in full in the United States. And again, this happened because of people's so-called private, comforting beliefs that you would prefer, Coach Red Pill, we leave alone. That you would prefer we don't challenge. Well, I'm sorry, Coach Red Pill, but I'm not prepared to live in a world where we don't challenge people's beliefs when those beliefs can influence and impact my life directly. Beliefs don't live in a vacuum. And so long as that's true, I'm here to resist beliefs that are untrue and dangerous and have negative social utility. And I hope, dear listener, that you'll join me in that mission. But let's hear him out. We're almost there.
There's nothing wrong with allowing people to have their illusions about God or about whatever else if it gives their lives a little bit of comfort. And there's nothing wrong with joining in that illusion, even if you don't really believe it. Because I certainly don't believe in Santa Claus, but when I'm talking to my daughter, I most certainly believe. Okay? I certainly believe because it gives her joy. And for the time that I indulge in that illusion of Santa Claus, I myself feel joy. I feel that joy and that anticipation of the big white guy with a big white beard who'll come down from the sky in his reindeer, sled and leave presents. Of course he doesn't exist, but so what? The happiness and joy and comfort are enough.
And of course, on the Santa Claus point in closing, I agree. The happiness, joy, and comfort are enough. But let's just focus on this in closing, dear listener. Imagine for a moment that believers in Santa Claus were introducing laws that were going to strip some or all of your rights away. Imagine if there were bands of people that believed in Santa Claus that carried out terrorist attacks. Imagine there were people who believed in Santa Claus that belittled members of the LGBTQ plus community. Imagine if people who believed in Santa Claus indoctrinated children or prevented people's access to contraception, even on continents where poverty, a large birth rate, and HIV are considerable problems. Imagine there were people going to bed suffering from existential anxiety and suffering from PTSD as a consequence of their fear of ending up on the naughty list. Because let's face it, even naughty kids still get their presents at Christmas, assuming their parents are responsible enough to purchase them in advance. So guys, this is the point that Coach Red Pill is missing. He has a caricature of faith in his mind. He's an atheist and he doesn't believe it himself, but he has this caricature of faith in his mind. Not only the caricature of God as a guy who lives on a cloud with a big white beard, but he has this caricature of faith as being this kind of amorphous, neutral, just generally happy, comforting thing that has no negative consequences. Essentially, he thinks of it as an inert property or entity, something that's a non-issue, something that only has positive consequences, a lot like the Santa Claus mythology. But therein lies the problem, folks. He's categorically, empirically wrong. He is absolutely fundamentally incorrect. Religion does pose serious problems in our society. We pay a huge price for religious belief. And as so long as that's true, I will stand against it. Doesn't mean that I'm going to kick down doors and try and wrestle people's faith out of them aggressively and in a hostile fashion. No. But does it mean that I'm going to continue producing these videos and resisting theology and religious beliefs? You bet your bottom dollar. Does it mean that I'm going to continue having consensual conversations where I try to change people's minds? Yes, absolutely. And that's what's missing here, folks. Coach Red Pill thinks that religion is harmless and that it only has positive social utility. But the truth is that that's not the case. It can be. But by his own admission, he believes that religion, at least Christianity and Judaism, has no negative consequences. And that, quite frankly, is the most inaccurate statement that I've heard in recent memory. And on that note, folks, I'm going to leave it there. thank you very much for watching the premiere episode of The Most Annoying Non-Religious People. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please jump into the comments below and let me know. Specifically, I'd be very interested in other non-religious speakers that you'd like me to react to. If there's an atheist or an agnostic out there who said something that you find objectionable that you'd like me to respond to, please make me aware of that person's name or drop the link in the comments below. Just be aware that sometimes YouTube can automatically delete a comment that includes a link, so it might be best to just name the video and the person who is speaking in the video and give me a timestamp, for example, and I can absolutely look into it, because I do want to build this series up and have it running co-equal to my Most Annoying Religious People series. With all that said, folks, if you did enjoy the video, please drop a like on it. It costs you nothing and it helps out the channel enormously. It tells the algorithm to share my video with other folks, and I'd really appreciate it if you did that. Furthermore, if you'd be interested in supporting the channel financially, you can become a patron today by clicking the link in the description below. That'll bring you to my Patreon page, where you can sign up for as little as £3 per month, and for that you will gain access to a plethora of perks, bonuses and extras. Thanks again for watching this video, folks, and I'll see you in the next one. All the best. Bye bye.